Okay, anybody hear me? Hello? Hello? Let's take our seats. We're about ready to start. Okay, now that I've asked you to sit down, if you can stand up to say the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Have a seat. Just a few ideas about upcoming events. In May 16th, Greg Cannell will be here to talk about life in society in the 1890s. So mark that date. Also on May 5th, Das Haus and Museum Complex will be opening again as usual. Of course, we'll be open all summer from May to October at 2 to 4 every Sunday. So if you want to come and visit us, please do. August 18th, you may know, is the Wheatfield Family Picnic. And as usual, Das Haus has a booth there. So you can stop by and talk with us or ask any questions or look at some materials that we have available. And I'd like to thank all the members who have submitted their annual donation, which was due on the 1st of April. And if you haven't, please submit it if you can. That keeps us going. And I think that's it for now. But I understand we've got somebody here that I'd like to introduce. That's Mr. Justin Higner, who is just coming in to say a few words.
This is 1824, Justin Higner, by the way. Want to turn off the light?
Yeah, I'll get it.
Please turn off those cell phone things you might have. Just a touch. Thank you. Turn off all cell phones. Tonight, you will have the opportunity to hear from Mr. Joseph Ellicott. The name Ellicott should be well known 200 years after he spent most of his life in Western New York. But there is so much we don't know about him as well. I must warn you that Mr. Ellicott has been in a dark mood as of late, so please be quiet as he enters. Mr. Ellicott, you have some guests.
It has been said that man dies twice. The first time when he physically dies, the next time when the last person says his name. You are here to hear my story. You are here so you can say my name. The year is 1824. I need to pack because they're sending me to New York City, to an institution, down the canal that I helped bring to Western New York. But I need to do things in sequence. Order and sequence are the key parts of my life. So to do sequence correctly, I need to start at the beginning, and the beginning is 1760, when I was born in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. A Quaker family. I was the 5th of 9 children. There was Andrew, Sarah, David, Ann, myself, Mary, Letitia, and the twins, Rachel and Benjamin. When I was just in early teens, we had to move. We moved to Maryland. When we moved, we took the 5 orphan children who lived in the farm next door. They were the Evans family. Some years later, 4 of those Evanses would marry 4 of the Ellicotts. But I'm out of sequence when I tell that part. So let me go back to when we arrived in Maryland. You see, my father was a very handy man. His relatives were clockmakers to the King of England. If you had an Ellicott clock, you had a marvelous clock. He wanted to build a mill in an area where the land was no longer working well. But he had an idea. Tobacco had ruined the land. He thought of using plaster of Paris as a fertilizer. He could start growing wheat. He would build a mill, and that's what he did. He founded Ellicott Mills. I finished my schooling in that area, and I thought I should become a teacher. Learning came very easy to me. However, students didn't show up ready to learn. They couldn't show up every day because they had work on their farms. And I found teaching not to be what I could do. So my oldest brother, Andrew, was a surveyor. He was working on a line called the Mason-Dixon line. They were trying to find the boundary between Maryland and Pennsylvania. So how do you do that? Well, you bring people over from Europe, Mr. Mason and Mr. Dixon. Because if you're from Europe, you are considered to be more intelligent than those of us from the States. So my brother worked with them. They laid out the boundary line. And then he got another job, and he said to me, "Joseph, why don't you come work with me?" He was going to go find the western boundary of Pennsylvania, because Pennsylvania did not have a western boundary at that time. So we went and we found that boundary. That boundary today is called Ellicott Line, after my brother Andrew. We did some more smaller jobs, and then we were asked to go find the western boundary of New York State. There were a couple things at stake here. The city of Erie, Pennsylvania, and the beautiful land called Presque Isle. Now, a king in England at one point had said, if you're going to find the western boundary of New York State, you need to find the western end of Lake Ontario. How do you do that? First, you have to cross the river. We crossed the Niagara. We were the first people to do a topographical study of Niagara Falls and the rapids, a beautiful area. And then we started to set through the wilderness of Canada to try and find the western end of Lake Ontario. We were intercepted by British soldiers who asked for our permission, or did we have permission? Do we have a form? No, we did not. They said, go back. We turned around and started back. Not too much later, somebody caught up with us and said, we have a form for you. You can go ahead. You can go find the western end of Lake Ontario. We had to go find this point. And in finding this point, we could find with this brand new tool. You see, William Penn, when he wanted the Mason-Dixon line, paid to have a transit sent across the ocean from England. What is a transit? A transit allows you to use something like a telescope to look at the stars, find the North Star. That will line up your latitude and longitude. A brilliant, brilliant tool. So we used it and found our line of longitude. Then we had to set back through Canada, cross the river again, go down around the bottom of Lake Erie and find that matching meridian of longitude. And we did. We found out that Erie is still in Pennsylvania. We found out Presque Isle is still part of Pennsylvania. But what we did is we measured the western boundary of New York State. It's not a long boundary. It's 18 miles, 50 chains, and 91 links. What is a chain? This is a surveyor's chain. "66 feet long. That's a link. So in New York State, the boundary was 18 miles, 50 chains, 91 links. How many chains in a mile? 80. If you could count to 80, we could use you on the surveying team. If you can't count to 80, you can still work with us, but you might be in charge of the horses or knocking the trees down. We needed intelligent workers. So when we finished that, I was beginning to get some acclaim for the work I was doing with my brother. And Colonel Pickering, who had been a colonel for George Washington as his Secretary of War, found me and said, "We need you to go to Georgia. The Creek Indians in the state of Georgia are having a dispute and we need it resolved." So I set out for Georgia, 800 miles. I can travel some on water, a lot on horse, and a horse travels maybe 25 miles a day. And there were no roads, no direct lines. You headed somewhere and they told you to go somewhere. It was a difficult journey, but I got there. And during the surveying of this boundary line, I nearly died of yellow fever. I recovered, my job finished there, and I was asked to join my brother in this brand new place that they were laying out called the District of Columbia. You see, Philadelphia was the capital for the United States, and they wanted a capital farther south so it would be more aligned in the center of the eastern seaboard. That was going to be Washington, District of Columbia. So my brother was there surveying, and what did they do? They brought a man from Europe, Pierre L'Enfant, because if you're from Europe, you're more intelligent. L'Enfant worked for a while and then got angry and went back to Europe. My brother Andrew, he's the surveyor of record for Washington, D.C. But L'Enfant had a wonderful idea. You see, surveying is all parallels and perpendiculars. You go straight, you bisect, you go sideways. Parallel, perpendicular. L'Enfant had a different idea. He said, what if you put out roads like the spokes of a wheel with something in the center, a hub? So he laid out Washington, D.C. in that kind of a manner. It was a brand new concept. In 1804, when I laid out New Amsterdam, which later became known as Buffalo, here's my map of 1804. Can you see how the streets are radiating out like the spokes of a wheel? It was a wonderful concept. And I work in parallels and perpendiculars, but I love that concept. But again, I'm out of sequence if I jump to 1804. So when we finished work in Washington, D.C., there was a group in the United States with a lot of money. They were the banking houses of Holland. They helped fund the Revolutionary War. They helped fund the French Revolution. Now they were investing in giant tracts of land in the United States. And they had surveyors working in western Pennsylvania, but they weren't working to what the banking houses thought should be the right speed. And they asked me if I would take over and do that. So I did. I finished their surveying, and during the winter I wrote a 58-page report for them. Bottom line of the report, it's not a good area. You see, when you survey, you list trees, you list places where you could build water mills, you list arable land, and this was much too rough a territory to be worthwhile for them. So upon my recommendation, they decided we're not going to do western Pennsylvania, but they looked to western New York, because in western New York, there was an area of land about 3.3 million acres, basically from the Genesee River to the boundary line that we had helped establish. There's a problem. There was a man, his name was Morris, Robert Morris. He owned the land. He had helped fund the Revolutionary War as well. he was running low on money. So he thought he would sell. Another problem. Senecas had lived here for years. So it had to be resolved who owned the land and would the Senecas trade off the land. So they decided to try negotiating. They met in Big Tree, an area toward Geneseo, 1,000 Senecas, led by 3 chiefs. You may have heard their names: Red Jacket, Corn Planter, and Farmer's Brother. The United States government sent Jeremy Wadsworth as their representative. Robert Morris sent his son Thomas. I was there, but not as a negotiator, only as an onlooker, because if it's resolved, they wanted me to survey that 3.3 million acres. Negotiations started. They were working out fairly well until alcohol became involved. And on the 3rd day, negotiations stopped. Fearing that things would be ended without a settlement, they'd already offered $100,000 in stock to the First Bank of the United States. 200,000 acres out of the 3.3 million acres would be set up in reservations around that area. That wasn't enough. What they added to the offer that made the difference: cows. 60 cows. Cows were not a common thing. With that offer in place, the Senecas agreed, and it was done. Other Seneca chiefs, you've probably heard of Red Jacket, his orating. You may not be as familiar with Farmer's Brother. You may have heard of the Devil's Hole Massacre in 1763, led by Farmer's Brother. He was a warrior. They were all warriors and intelligent men. But they settled the agreement. My job now was to survey 3.3 million acres. I already knew the western boundary. I knew the edge of Lake Erie. So I finished going around the boundary, and then I set in for the winter to figure out, how am I going to do this? How am I going to organize a wilderness? There were maybe 30 white settlers in that whole area. So I thought, I'm going to do it as though I was a general. So I made a list of what would I need to do that. So I thought, I'm going to need 130 men. Some are surveyors, draftsmen, cooks, axemen, and camp keepers. And I need to purchase food by the barrel. So I needed 270 barrels of flour, 100 barrels of pork, and 15 barrels of beef. And let me tell you about that pork. I was very specific. I'm a very specific man. I think things should be done exactly and be done correctly. So here's what I told them I needed. The pork should be of merchantable quality, well put up and salted in good, clean, tight, substantial barrels, containing 200 neat weight each. There shall not be in each barrel more than 3 shoulders without legs and 2 heads without ears and snouts. I needed other material. 5 boats, 2 ox teams, 35 pack horses, 100 pair of horseshoes, 200 blankets, 30 regimental tents, 70 axes, and 105 pairs of shoes, along with portfolios and lead pencils and quills to do the writing. The cost? $70,921.69. The difficulties? Men would get drunk, men would get injured, animals would get injured. We did more than just have a compass and chain. We were going to use the transits. And I also standardized a ruler. There were many 1-foot rulers. I standardized them. I took all of the 1-foot rulers, I averaged them out, and I developed and gave to each one of my teams a 1-foot brass ruler. I standardized the 12-inch ruler. Order is important. You see, when surveying teams went out, many surveying teams would take an axe or knife and just cut a mark in a tree. That would grow back. No. We're doing this my way. We're pulling a boulder into place to mark the miles. And I'm going to have the boulders chiseled with a code. So if you tell me the code on that stone, I will tell you where you are in that 3.3 million acres. It was being done correctly. It was being done my way. People said I wasn't a sociable person. That didn't matter to me. I had a job to do, and I had to do it correctly. That's why people liked what I did. I did what they wanted, and I did it well. So how would I do this 3.3 million acres? Well, let's just say I set up two teams. One team was going to go along the edge of the purchase. That's a Phelps-Gorham purchase, was over there. Another team was coming from here. They're going from Pennsylvania all the way to Lake Ontario, clearing a path 66 feet wide from Pennsylvania to Lake Ontario. I needed a transit line. We'd use the transit at night to shoot the North Star, figure out where we were, and keep going. So I had a true north-south running line called my transit line. From there, we would divide it up into 6-mile squares for towns. And that's how I proceeded to lay out that area. When I was finished with it, they now needed to sell the property. Now, the first person who was coordinating the Dutch banking houses, his last name was Cazenove. I named some things after him. Cazenovia. He was in Philadelphia because, remember, Philadelphia was the capital of the United States. That was the big area that people went to. Would he come to Western New York? No. How did you get to Western New York? You took a boat from Philadelphia to Albany. You could take a stagecoach across to Canandaigua, and then you got on a horse, and you tried to find Western New York. He never came. Within 2 years, he hired another man, Paolo Bustai. Paul Busty, some people call him. He came twice. During the 25 years I worked for the Holland Land Company, twice he came from Philadelphia. The first time was 1804. When they were trying to find who was going to sell this land, many people applied. They gave the job to me because I knew the land, and they knew my work, and they knew I would be exacting about what I was doing. I never married. My job was my work, and doing it right was my job. So we started selling off the land, and I didn't want to give 10,000 acres to some person who was going to speculate and make a lot of money. That was a wilderness. There had been wars, and veterans were starting to come to the wilderness of Western New York to settle. My job was to get them to buy the land. So I figured along a main road every 10 miles, I will give the property to build an inn and a blacksmith shop. 10 miles farther, an inn and a blacksmith shop. My first office was in Ace and Ransom's Inn. But I'm working, when I'm thinking of it, on the wrong side of the property. I'm located over here. People are coming that way. So I decided to make another location, and I called it Batavia. And I set up Batavia in 1802, and Batavia actually means fertile land and good soil, from back in Holland. Now I'm going to read some bits for you that I have to give you an idea of what was happening in Western New York at that time and who was here. Batavia. In 1802, when I moved the Holland land office to Batavia, there were 56 people. In 1803, population rose to 230. By 1810, village of Batavia, over 1,100 inhabitants, while the town of Batavia had over 3,660 people. In 1820, Batavia outnumbered the population of Rochester, but less than Canandaigua. So what was Rochester like? In 1809, the Rochester site was described by a state legislator as a godforsaken place inhabited by muskrats, visited only by straggling trappers, through which man nor beast could gallop without fear of starvation and illness. But Canandaigua, compared to Canandaigua at that time, 120 handsome houses, most of them wood and painted white. In the center square were an attractive brick courthouse, a jail, and an elegant academy. 6 stores, 6 taverns, 2 tanning yards, 2 distilleries, 6 doctors, and 6 lawyers. But why was Canandaigua important? At the time when I started, this was one county. It was all called Ontario County. The capital, Canandaigua. For me to register deeds, I had to travel to Canandaigua, which took several days by horse. It was not good use of my time. So I had a brilliant idea. What if we could break Ontario County into several counties? So we started. We first made it Genesee County. And we made Batavia the county seat. I no longer had to travel to do my work. Now, our representatives we sent to Albany, trying to get what we needed, we had 2 representatives until I had another idea. What if we broke Genesee County up into more counties? Chautauqua, Cattaraugus, Niagara, Allegheny, Erie. We now had representation in Albany. Not too much later than that, when I was doing that, a signer of the Declaration of Independence by the name of Elbridge Gerry had an idea in Maryland. He wanted to get reelected, so he thought, I'll change boundary lines. And the term gerrymandering for Elbridge Gerry came about. There's no Ellicott mandering because I had this great idea to get more representation in Albany by creating more counties, but it worked for us. So we proceeded that way, trying to sell off the land, but it was never enough for the Holland Land Company. And then a thing called the War of 1812 was coming about because of unrest, especially along the Niagara River, Lake Ontario, Lake Erie. When that happened, the burning of Lewiston and Black Rock, people fled to Batavia for safety. And they were fairly safe there. Once that problem was resolved, an idea that somebody had come up with earlier was starting to get more talk. That was, what if we could move the farmers' goods from Western New York to the markets, Albany, New York? The roads were not working. If you didn't have enough money to buy the land, I might say, clear a mile of road. I might say, give me some salt, give me something to get it going. But we still couldn't get the goods there. So this idea of a canal came about. The first idea was, what if we took the canal from Albany up through Oswego into Lake Ontario, across Lake Ontario, and into Lewiston. Lewiston was a port of entry, already done. I pushed for a different idea. What if we brought a canal across through the state, through the property of the Holland Land Company? I'll donate some property for the canal. People will come, cities will build, land will sell. After much talk, and DeWitt Clinton was one of the people involved in a lot of this. He wasn't governor at the time, but he was a very important person. They decided to try the land route. Then there's another issue. Should it be above the escarpment or below the escarpment? I pushed for above the escarpment. I had a nephew sit at the mouth of Tonawanda Creek, track how much water was coming through, and it really wasn't enough to keep the canal going. So I agreed the below the escarpment route should be taken. Another issue, where should the canal end? Should it end in Black Rock, the biggest town at the time, or go farther to the mouth of Lake Erie to Buffalo Creek? It wound up going to Buffalo Creek, an area where I happen to have many acres of property. It worked very well for me. Now, in order to build that canal, they decided to put me on the commission board in 1817 because I knew the land, I knew what was going on, and that worked. But the number of problems were occurring at the time. They said I was having mood swings, difficulty getting along with people. I didn't care how I got along with people. I had a job to do and to do it correctly, and it had to be done in sequence. And by 1819, I stepped off that board of commission because I thought this isn't working for everybody. I need to back away from this. So I did. People around that time were thinking, Joseph Ellicott is a European. He's taking our money and sending it back to Holland. People started getting up in arms against me, a Quaker from Pennsylvania to Maryland to New York, unjustly so. And it was in 1821 that Paul Bustye made his second trip to Western New York to demand my letter of resignation. I had organized the wilderness. I'd worked 25 years for the Holland Land Company. I had never married. I built my home in Batavia. I was going to build it in the area that they changed to Buffalo from my New Amsterdam. I had even named streets after some of the Dutch. There's Willink and Van Voorst. Then I named others like Cazenovia, Mohawk, Huron, Chippewa, Elk. They wanted my resignation because I wasn't getting along well enough with people. So in 1821, I resigned. I had a 25-home mansion in Batavia.